Welcome to Audio Nuggets. Today in the cypher, we're joined by Angela Olivia Burton. She's gracing mining for gold with her presence. Angela is not only a friend and a colleague, she's also a universal vessel who epitomizes liberation. Angela has done so many things in her career and will continue to bring her best contribution to a liberated being as we attempt to move into reparations, abolishing the family regulation system, and in today's conversation, organizing for Black justice. What I want you to really listen to is Angela's intelligence, her fierceness, her non-shrinking demeanor. Angela embodies what it means to be a human. And in essence, Angela will demonstrate and also challenge us to believe, or to ask ourselves, I should say, why is it that we continue to treat Black people differently than other human beings? Angela Burton will dissect the history of the law written in 1974, and she also understands that CAPTA is where CPS lives, and therefore the lever is to start there. Sit back, take a listen, pull in each and every embodied word that Angela has to offer us. You are here on Audio Nuggets, and let's welcome Angela Olivia Burton. Angela Olivia Burton, it's been a long time coming. Thank you for joining us here on Audio Nuggets. We have a lot to talk about. How are you? And welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to just chop it up with you. We've been in spaces together, and this is the first time we've had an opportunity to just really talk about things in a very concentrated way. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. And you mentioned being in space together. I want to say publicly, because we are in an all Black space, right? I want to say publicly that I have commended you, right? I mean, I admired you before this thing happened between us, in which I knew was all love. And you remember exactly what space I'm talking about, but I know that it's rare, right? It's rare that we demonstrate Black love in the way that you did with me. So I thank you. And for the listeners who want to know what the hell I'm talking about, right? We get in these conversations, Angela, and we know the real deal. We know the reality. And it was about 20 minutes or so that I had spent really explaining not only racism, but racial categorization to a person. And when we got into our loving space, sort of reminded me of a hush harbor from the days of enslavement, where we could only come together and have safe, sacred spaces, right, without the gaze of plantation owners or what have you.
Yeah.
And you said to me, basically, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but brother, that labor that I saw you endure was painful, right? And you do not have to do that anymore, right? And to love on you even further, if you do that shit again, I got something to say to you, right? That's love,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I think when I look back on that moment, I was in a space, and we were in a space where the very thing that you were attempting to avoid, which was, white people taking up unnecessary space and distracting from the issue and the point at hand, was happening in that moment. And you were giving grace. You were being very graceful, and I was irritated as hell. and I tried my best to hold back. And finally, I don't even know if you knew this, but I was in the chat going, "Shut the fuck up." Choose the room that you want to go into. And so when we were able to get into that space, together, this hush harbor, sort of that you talked about, I was still sort of in that mode. And as you say, even though, I know it came off as harsh when I was like, "Corey, I'll cut you if you keep that up," right? It was definitely one of those moments where I felt the elders, the ancestors coming through me. I'm 62 years old this year, quiet as it's kept. And at that moment, I really felt the weight of that experience and of that responsibility. And I'm grateful that you took it in the way that it was intended, and not as something that was, personal or judgmental, because it really wasn't about you, because you were so graceful. It wouldn't have been me, who took the time, but you did. But I want us to understand that at this moment in time, it is late in the day. We don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of energy to spend on basic, information about what is happening to us. Like, let's get to it. And that's sort of where it is. And so after that happened, I was like, I want to go on his podcast so we can actually really have some chance to talk some of these things through. So I appreciate you.
I appreciate you, and I utilize that experience, especially with my Black body friends and colleagues, right, to demonstrate that sometimes, Angela, we can watch the body be annihilated in public, and we won't do a damn thing about it, right? And right in that moment, that was an action, right? That was an action to demonstrate, look, I'm liberated enough, right? And speaking how we speak, I got some age over you, son, and I'm not gonna let you go ahead and just see you keep putting yourself through this, right? And I mean, wholeheartedly respected you for that, and continue to, and I know it was love. And so get into it, right? Let's talk about who you are as Angela Olivia Burton, right? I know you got some rooted villages in Brooklyn and Mississippi. So tell us who you are.
Yeah, so I always come into spaces as a Black woman, first of all, as Black, and as a woman, a child of the 60s, I like to say, having been born in 1960. And raised by the village, my grandmother and my mother's sisters, and all of the mothers in the church. I'm a Pentecostal, born and raised in a Pentecostal church, so have that whole experience. I was fortunate enough to be born as a person who was very, very hungry for knowledge and learning. So I've always been like a bookworm and a nerd, and whatever else people want to put on that kind of approach to life. And so that has led me into spaces where I've been able to accelerate and excel in academic spaces, going to from junior high school to high school in Manhattan, Stuyvesant High School, which is specialized high school. Graduating at 16 years old, having been skipped a grade from the 7th grade to the 9th grade in junior high school. So graduated a year early, went to Cornell University, on scholarships, had the opportunity at Cornell University to be exposed to people like Professor James Turner, took classes with Dr. Ben Jochannan, Manning Marable, all of these, and all the people that they brought, to the university through the Africana Studies and Research Center. So, getting a really good grounding in history, in culture, you know, and community, right? Building as a college student, and then being able to leave there, do some, you know, work out in the world, and then ended up going to law school. Started my law school career at Rutgers Law School in Newark, and then I transferred to New York University, which is where I graduated from law school. And throughout all this, you know, I've just been Black, right? I just remained connected with my family, with my community, and all of the work that I do, whether it was in, you know, corporate spaces, you know, corporate law firms, or whether it was teaching, you know, in law schools like NYU Law School, Syracuse University Law School, CUNY Law School, always having our liberation as Black people, our history as Black people in this country and in the world scheme at the forefront of what I do, and really just being a good family member, you know, helping to take care of family children and other. I don't have my own children, I have other people's children, right, that I help to take care of. You know, growing out of my experience as a, you know, as a member of a village, right, where that was, you know, what we did. We took care of everyone. Yeah, so those are just some of the things that define who I am and my journey. Of course, there's lots more, you know, that has impacted me, but those are some of the things that come to mind right off the top of my head. Yeah.
Wow, and I mean that's a lot, and so I'm thinking about the context, right, of you entering this world 1960, and then we think about child protection as we know it with battered baby syndrome. You were just a wee bitty little thing when that research started to sort of spark what was soon to come 12, 14 years later, right?
Right, right.
And so all of these spaces, what I'm also hearing you not say is you learn from these environments how to be big, right? Based on what these environments, right, these structures were offering based on this ideology, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, when you say how to be big, I'm not exactly sure what you mean, but I'll take it in this respect. What I learned, I think, from all these various experiences and opportunities and the challenges that I faced is, you know, show up. You know, show up with intention, show up with purpose, show up to learn, but also show up to contribute and to bring back, you know, what you've learned, and to use that not just for me, not just for self-gratification or, you know, promotion, but to bring that information and to bring those experiences to leverage power in our communities. And so if that's part of what you mean by, you know, being big, yeah, don't shrink. I'm not a shrinking violet. I'm a very introspective person. I have in the past considered myself shy, but when it comes to the work of liberation and the work of leveraging whatever power, whatever privilege, whatever influence I might have, yeah, no, I'm not shy. I just show up.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it, right? No shrinking, right? And so through this quest and thirst for knowledge, right? Your family connectivity, community building. What was the pivotal moment in your life that actually you might be able to touch and notice that guided you to abolitionism, right? And so what did you witness or were witnessing? What did you notice, feel? What events were happening that made you, you know, you could not just stand by, right, and adhere?
No, I never did. You know, that's just, you know, if you met any of my aunts or my mother or my grandmother, right, like that's not where I come from. We always come out, you know, with what it is. But what I will say is that, you know, when I was in law school, I had the opportunity to study with people like, you know, H. Leon Higginbotham, Peggy Cooper Davis was one of my mentors. I worked for her as a research assistant when she was working on a book called Neglected Stories, which is about the 14th Amendment and family values and the impact of abolition, slave abolition on Black families and on the 14th Amendment and the concept of liberty. So I think the seed was really planted in terms of just thinking about systems and the impact on Black families as something to be studied, as something to be, sort of looked at and understood from its ideological premises and to resist. And so I do give a lot of credit to that experience of working with those brilliant minds who were dedicated to the liberation of Black families, and in particular, like I said, Professor Davis, and the opportunity to do research and really connect abolition, the word, to what's happening to Black families now. Another pivotal moment, I think, occurred when I discovered Dorothy Roberts' first book, Shattered Bonds. I was teaching in a clinic at Syracuse University, which was a family law clinic, and putting together my syllabus. I was like, okay, I got to figure out what reading I'm going to have the students do, and that was always one of the critical pieces that I would have students read. Then fast forward, 20 years later, another pivotal moment of putting all of this together and really going, oh, wait, this is abolition work that we're talking about here.
Right.
When I had the opportunity to submit a proposal to the Columbia Journal of Race and the Law that was honoring Dorothy Roberts' publication of Shattered Bonds. And there was a call for papers to talk about, the connection between her work and what was going on now. And I had the opportunity to work with a parent who was affected by the family policing system, Angeline Montebaum, and we wrote an article together, which was an extremely important learning experience for me and really solidified my purpose of using, as I said again before, whatever power, privilege, and influence I have to leverage and elevate the voices of those who are directly impacted. So so those are a couple of pivotal experiences that led me to abolition as we know it now with regard to the family policing system. Yeah.
You said a couple of things that sparked my attention that I had not accounted for as a part of this conversation, but I'm going to try to wedge this piece in. So as an attorney, one, full well what the Declaration says about abolition, right? And so, right. So there's no need to go over that one-on-one class again. So I won't even attend to what people don't like about abolitionism, right? That's a waste of our time today. But in your experience as a researcher and assistant and author, I hear you use term impacted when you mention parent, right? I can embrace that particular nomenclature for several reasons, right? But there's a piece of where we are in child welfare systems improvement, child welfare transformation that's not transformation. And we're talking about the centrality of those with lived experience. Now, I push back on those two words, lived experience, because it doesn't encapsulate who I am or who you are. Like, I would never know your Mississippi and Brooklyn roots if I just looked at you through that myopic lens. And it comes from the field of phenomenology, but it also says that a person's reduction to trauma is only studied, Angela, right? It's only studied. It can't be used for anything that's valid because of the subjective nature, regardless of, as you mentioned, the parent who co-authored the article with you, regardless of Ms. Montebaum's objective relationship with child protection, regardless of that objective relationship. So I wonder what you think about using the term lived experience as we're talking about community members, parents, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I struggle a lot with how to really capture with language, right? With terminology, how to really capture what it is that we're talking about. And, we banter these words around: lived experience, impacted parent, parent affected, foster alum, foster youth, foster care, like all these terminologies. And, I could go on and on: Democrat, Republican, right? Like, what do these terms mean, right? And so, I don't, and I think about it a lot, but I don't stress over it a lot, right? So I listen to parents who have experienced this system in a variety of ways. Some of them use and accept the terminology of impacted parents. Some of them use and accept, person with lived experience, and some of them use or, accept things like, somebody that got fucked over by the system, right? So,
Right.
right. So I don't stress a lot, but I do, like I said, I do contemplate the best way to frame what it is we're talking about. So I would just say, I don't judge, one way or another, and I'm always trying to come up with better ways of saying what things are. But I'd be interested in hearing more, from you about, why that is something that is of interest, and what you think the import is.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I appreciate you asking that question. I've been noodling on uh, three very simple questions that I started to ask myself.
Mm-hmm.
Who gave me the term?
Mm-hmm.
Why I embrace it
Mm-hmm.
or have not? And does it serve me?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, Angela, in a short way, having a level of experiences in CPS, right? Experiencing the equivalent of civil death penalty, right? Termination, all of those things. Being invited into spaces 15 years ago, the key to get me in that room, Angela, was my trauma, right? The key to get me in that room was my trauma, and it felt really yucky, right? It just did, right? For lots of reasons. Nothing wasn't changing. We're talking the same thing. And here I am, the poster child for light-skinned, bald-headed Black men who had terminated their rights, right? All of these things. And so I've begun to ask other people those same three questions.
Yeah.
And so some of the responses have been, wow, I never really thought about it, but the system gave it to me. And one young woman, we were in a physical space. She said that you people gave it to me. I embrace it because that's what you told me I had to embrace to be in this spot. And now that I'm thinking about it, it doesn't serve me. Right. And so some people are unaware of why we even default to utilizing language. And I also believe that it stems from the in-look and the power of family regulation, right? Yeah. So we get, so the core function of today's child welfare system is power over parent, full stop. Core function. That's what's happening. Whether mom or dad liked the systems or the services that they got, right, they still were dictated by this institution and structure. Yeah. And so I see this language and this ebbs and flows of language change similarly. Yeah. That it's patriarchal. It gives a sense of power, and it also in space others folks. So if I'm tagged with the reduction of trauma on my back, when I'm in spaces with decision makers, will my voice be validated? Now I can go beyond that individually, but what about the totality, right? Of people who are experiencing that? So that's where my attention has gone with it. And what might come out of it for me is how about we first abandon the need to categorize folk first?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because you
Mhm.
know that the next step when I'm talking to people who are quote unquote professional, they'll say, well, what do we need to call them? Right? When
Right,
you don't
right, right, right. Well, and yeah, and it obscures it obscures a lot of things, right? But what it obscures and what it does, like you said, categorizing, and then we figure out what we need to how we're going to how we're going to engage with that person. Well, they're as my friend Joyce McMillan says, they like to reduce you sometimes to just a parent,
right.
right? And so when with my work, whether it's working with, Ms. Montalban on the article, or whether it's, doing teach-ins with parents who are entangled and entrapped in the system, to help them understand what they should be able to expect from their lawyers, which many people don't know, because lawyers who represent parents also oftentimes are replicating the oppressive tactics and engagement with parents that the system does. It's more about, for me, it's what are we all bringing to the table? um, and that's why I say, when we talk about Democrats or Republicans, I don't know what that means, right? I want to know where you stand on this issue or that issue, and then I can know how to engage with you over particular things, right? And so for me, it's about the expertise, it's about the experience, about the perspective, about the contribution that any particular person can bring to both identifying what issues are, what the problems are, and what to do about it, right? And that's, and that's why I say, I don't struggle a whole lot with the terminology.
Yeah.
I like to kind of get beyond, so to speak, that terminology, to who are we, what are we doing here? Who are we?
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
I'm 100% with you. And I believe that some people will continue to grapple with that, just with this need to have a category, and we get stuck there. We won't get to the juice. And talking about some of that juice, right? Let's get in the thick of things. There's been a lot happening. You wait a minute. You went to fucking Geneva. What? And I'm talking about Geneva, Switzerland. I mean,
Switzerland, right? Not
Switzerland.
Geneva, New York. There's
Right, right.
I'm in Albany, New York, and Geneva, New York is not too far, but Switzerland is like the other side. I was like talking to my aunt, and I was like, yeah, it looks like I had to go to like one of the whitest countries in the world to talk about, Black liberation, the
Right.
liberation of Black families, right? So yeah, that I'm still sort of in awe of
Yeah.
how the universe, has placed me, has given me the opportunity to be in a space like that on the world stage, speaking to the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, with a group of women, Joyce McMillan, Henna Naveed, Shireen White, and Stephanie Pearson, to travel to Geneva to talk about the United States government and the United States family policing system, and get results that we can then, use going forward, and which we have been using that going forward. But I'll tell you, it was a manifestation, Corey, really, of a seed that was planted in my spirit, more than a year ago. Where when I started to look at the whole, Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 1974, which we kind of alluded for as part of that paper that I wrote with Ms. Montalban, and really digging into the history of it. And I was like, this is where this thing lives. This is where CPS was created as a national system, formal system. And this is where we have to go to attack it. And that means that we have to go after federal policies and laws, federal funding. And as my friend Joyce McMillan says, the United States government is not going to police itself. And so
Right.
I knew we both had to go to Congress as well as to the UN. And that was something that was just in my spirit for the longest time. And so when this opportunity came up after Shireen White and Stephanie Pearson at Children's Rights, the organization Children's Rights submitted, a proposal, what they call a shadow report, to this committee, to this UN committee, the CERD committee, to include in their review of United States policies regarding racial discrimination, to include the family policing system, specifically about Black families, and that was accepted. And they had the forethought, or the word is not coming to me, but they understood, right, that the best impact, the most impactful person to go to that committee was Joyce McMillan, right? Who
Right.
a mom who many years ago was impacted by the system, was entrapped, entangled in the system. And once they invited Joyce to come along, she invited me to come along, and we all just, it was like a 2-week span of me finding out about it. And the next thing I knew, I was at Newark Airport on my way to Geneva, Switzerland. So
Now, like there's a lot of vibe sensations. I mean, you talk about, like, you said the whitest of the white. Like, I use an analogy even when I'm talking with institutions, like, look at your leadership ladder, right? It looks like the peaks of the Swiss mountains, right? The higher you go, right, the wider you get, right?
Yeah.
But what I resonated with, and I saw Shireen in Baltimore a couple of weeks after, right? What I'm resonating with is how Malcolm X in the 60s, right? He was quoted as saying, we have to internalize the civil rights movement in the United States by calling on the United Nations to focus on the lives of Black Americans through a human rights lens. When you expand the civil rights struggle to the level of human rights, you can then take the case of Black people in this country before the UN, right? And I wonder, like, how that came about. Like, you talk about going big and let's get at it, and let's cut beyond all the muck that we know and are hiding behind, right? Definitions, feelings, and all that. Bump your feelings. Let's just get to something really, really big here.
Yeah.
And so what organizing came out of that? And I would love for you to unpack a couple of questions here for the audience who are not familiar with CPS lives here. Here meaning CAPTA, right? CPS, I want to say that again. CPS lives here. And so what were the vibes and the impacts from that conversation with the UN? Because I know that there's been some results, some hearings, right?
Coming up,
So I gave a lot there for you to
Well, first I want to go back to the Malcolm X quote, and one of the things that as I'm remembering, sort of impressionistically, this whole experience is when I found out that we were going to be going to Geneva, I went back to some readings that I'd done many, many years before. So, Paul Robeson and others, even before Malcolm talked about the UN, have brought the condition of Black people to the international stage, to the UN. And there's a book called we call it genocide, or we claim genocide. And so I went back to some of that documentation and just started to look at it, where they were talking about police brutality and the lynchings and all these things that were going on, against Black people, and just trying to get a sense of, okay, so if we go to the UN, so what, right? Like, what's going to happen? What's the point of that, right? And so I think that there were a couple of things that really moved me to look at this as an opportunity to add value and to add gravitas and gravity to this idea that Black families, as the core of our community, as the core of our existence, is being, that this CPS system, this so-called child protective system, is a continuation, is a legacy of slavery, right?
Yes.
And bringing that perspective to the international stage, what does that open up for us, right? And so going to the question of, CPS lives here, and looking at the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, that name always makes me chuckle, right? Because it's just those things that we were talking about earlier, the language.
The language, yeah.
How the language is used to divert your attention from what it really actually is, right? So the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 1974, CAPTA, which, by the way, will mark 50 years in 2024 of its existence, is where the United States government basically codified this system, and these are the terminologies that's used in the federal legislation itself: a system of reporting, right? Investigation, prosecution, and treatment of alleged child abuse and neglect, right? And so kind of also, as I began that research and thinking about, and this was before going to the UN, but thinking about, okay, so what are we talking about here? What are the underlying, I'm a systems thinker, right? So what are the underlying premises and ideologies and, of this system, and really trying to dig into the underpinnings of what it's all about. And you can see, just looking at those words, it is criminalizing allegations that a parent specifically, or a caregiver, has maltreated a child to such an extent that the government now has to come in and, quote unquote, protect that child. Not only protect that child, and we can talk about what the hell that actually means and what it does and does not do, but to punish, right, and take over the life of and regulate and control the parent in order to treat them for this maltreatment of children. And so, so when we went to the UN, we talked about this system and explained to the 18-member CERD committee and all those who were there from the United States, from other organizations that were there to talk about police brutality, or Cancer Alley and environmental issues and reproductive issues, many of whom did not understand that this is an oppressive system that has the harshest impact on Black families in particular. And of course, other marginalized communities, Indigenous families, families affected by disabilities and things like that. And so, so it was really an awesome opportunity to not only educate, but then to see the CERD committee in so many different levels really respond to that and really take verbatim our suggestions about what the United States government needs to do going forward, one of which is huge, which is that the committee recommended that the United States government review and look to repealing and or amending these harmful laws, such as CAPTA, such as the Adoption Assistance and Child Welfare Act, and such as the Adoption and Safe Families Act, which allows the federal government and state governments to terminate children's rights to their parents. They call it termination of parental rights, but it's really termination of children's rights, not only to their parents, but to all of their family connections. And so we're really excited to be moving forward on a variety of different fronts to move that agenda forward. And also the second thing was that the recommendation to hold public hearings, including congressional hearings, so that Black families in particular can document their lived experience of the system and the trauma and the impact, not only on their everyday lives, but the intergenerational impact of these policies. So yeah, very excited to be moving ahead on those.
I mean, mesmerizing on all levels and fascinating. And, you know, I'm not receiving this heaviness that I would have gotten from these kinds of activities maybe 10 years ago, because, you know, we were in a space where it seemed to be really, really difficult, almost resistant to say we need to do something specifically for Black families. Like, you know, we would want to put all the ingredients and bake this cake of inclusion or diversity or whatever it is we're doing today for that $4 million scheme. But that's a whole nother conversation there that we'll talk about. But I saw and felt you paint a real mosaic of a part of why we're saying family policing, right? So the reporting, the investigating, the prosecuting, this race neutral policy didn't have to turn out this way, right? It didn't have to turn out this way. Captive dollars were not originally doled out to do this. States and federal government sort of colluded to say, we're going to bump what the White House said in 1909. We're going to use this money, right? I mean, we've been talking about neglect for 100 some odd years now. It's nothing new,
right,
under the sun, right?
Right.
And so there was a push to make sure that families who are experiencing certain conditions could get some of the dollars that were doled out. But that's also excluding Black families because they weren't included in the conversation. So let's not forget that. And these other policies that you speak of, I have often called them the Big Five, and 6 if you include Fleming, and also 7 if you include Families First. Because, Angela,
absolutely,
we're going to find ourselves with a similar situation where we're seeing racism as outcome, right? Racial disparate outcomes with candidacy and who gets services and who doesn't, and who's being sort of broken, torn apart from their families and put into stranger care, while white families or families that acquiesce or comply or do right will get the services they use, even though they don't take the magical blue pill and throw that shit away, but they'll just do, right? Because there's no magic pill for what's happening. And so I wanted to make sure that people really saw why we say family policing. But there's some things that have come, as you know, before the call, we were saying that the universe is aligning, right? So a couple of things that, you know, I can say from my point of view, that the racism in child welfare is a human rights issue. You children's rights, you did that, right? And there was also a lot of work leading up to that. And then there's some outputs from that, some things that have emerged from that, some organizing. The first time that people may be hearing this today is mandated reporters against mandated reporting. And I'm also drawn to the push to have institutions refuse. See, my grandmother said in order to stand for something, you got to say no to some things sometimes too, right? Because if power economics is the churner of this whole damn thing, then we can't keep taking money that is to do harm, right? So this refusing captive funding, those are two, right, tangible tentacles of this movement. So what are your thoughts about mandated reporting against mandated reporting and this for those institutions that really want to do no harm and
Yeah.
to become something new, do
Yeah.
you think they'll need to sort of demonstrate that by not accepting some federal funds?
So there's a lot, to unpack on those two points. But before I do that, I do want to go back to where you were talking about what we were talking about earlier before we got online about the universe sort of aligning, so that there's now this embrace of being able to point specifically at the experience, and the trauma and the impact of the system on Black families in particular. And you talked about, historical developments of how we got to where we are with this system, with the Fleming rule and with, the exclusion of Black families from certain benefits, and then the move toward using child protection, quote unquote, as a way to say we're going to be addressing the welfare of children through this particular approach to child well-being by protecting them from their parents, right? These terrible parents who are not taking care of them, who are brutally abusing them, X, Y, and Z. So what I have come to at this point in my journey of talking about, Black children and Black families in regard to and in relationship to government, around the well-being of Black families and Black children, is when have we seen, what I want to see, which we have not seen, is when do you see the federal statute that starts, the purpose of this statute is to repair and to help heal the damage that has been done to Black children and Black families from slavery until today. And in order to do that, we are going to set aside X amount of dollars for blah, 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 blah. And we are going to put a moratorium on CPS investigation, whether you repeal CAPTA or do this or other. This is what I'm looking for. Where is the affirmative, reparative approach to what has been done to Black children and Black families over generations? That's what my whole approach to dismantling and rebuilding is all about. So I'll just put that out there.
And I just want to say, if people ain't here, sis, you just said reparations, right? And I mean, and it has to be what we're looking for, because there's no truth without that level of reconciliation and without that opportunity to repair, with concrete resources, as we've seen time and time again throughout history, where we created social welfare for white bodies, right? That was a level of American repairing through immigration, even through their own movement to get them some type of uplift out of deplorable conditions.
Right.
So these things landed on us.
On us, right.
And those boulders were thrown by systems, by federal policy, and the actors that manifested how those policies should look. That leads us now to 76.1% of the calls are still neglect related, and we know where those calls are coming from.
Right, and they're and they're about conditions that are created by societal disenfranchisement, continued disenfranchisement, and active barriers put in the way of our progress. And so that the reversal of that approach is really the core of what what drives me into the arena and the space of reparations. And I think that's resonated with the other organizations from the United States who were also in Geneva, that also resonated with the working group, the UN working group of experts on children of people of African descent, that also has issued a statement saying, you know, family policing against Black families is rooted in slavery and needs to be addressed from that perspective, right? And so reparations is obviously, for me at least, you know, that family policing has to be included in that larger conversation about reparations and how we go about, you know, repairing and ending that oppression against Black families. And as far as, you know, reconciliation, you know, that term, you know, we can unpack that, but I don't know that, you know, that is actually a thing, because I'm not looking to what are we reconciling, right? No, in what's happening, and recompense, let's call it recompense,
I like it.
You know, compensation, right? And moving forward. So, but to jump to the other points that you raised about mandated reporters against mandated reporting. And so, you know, it's kind of a movement that has really taken off from where I sit, you know, starting with the social work, you know, social worker community, recognizing that they have been co-opted into this role of being family police, being aligned with an oppression of families in the CPS system. And again, going back to CAPTA, which basically, you know, deputized, you know, social workers and police officers and doctors, physicians, you know, teachers into this system of surveillance and reporting. And so it's we're starting to see not only social workers who are, you know, who kind of kick this off about mandated reporters against mandated reporting, really supporting policy changes, legislative changes that not only support parents' rights to, you know, be given an understanding of what their rights are, vis-a-vis government intervention, but also resisting the role that has been placed on them of being those overseers of families, and giving them all this subjective discretion to just report. You see something, say something, right? Like, what is the something that we're seeing and saying, right? And then try to understand what happens as a result of their actions, right? That reporting a family is not a neutral act. It's an act of violence in many cases, right? Because what happens is not help. And those mandated reporters, including social workers, and we're hearing more and more from doctors as well, as we go out and talk about the system and what it does and what happens after that report, and doctors and physicians and pediatricians reaching out to us and saying, I had no idea. Right? I thought that this was going to get this family help. And so this movement of mandated reporters against mandated reporting is growing. And I think it's going to be a really important aspect of dismantling the system. And in fact, you know, Corey, reaching back into you know, where this all started with the mandated reporting, it was physicians that were the first ones who were mandated, and many physicians resisted, and they were like, no, this is going to undermine our relation, the physician patient relationship, and the privilege, and our ability to actually support the health and well-being of the families that come to us. Well, they unfortunately were, you know, overridden, and this is where we are now. But I think a lot of them are starting to come back around and see, you know, the danger and the harm of that. And then, you know, with regard to institutions refusing CAFTA funding, as we're digging deeper into how funding is driving, you know, separation and termination of families and destruction of families, really, let me just say it that way. We're starting to look more closely at, you know, what is the money? right? We know that more than 80% of federal funding and state funding in the quote unquote child welfare system goes to reporting, separating, termination, and adoption, right? And 20% to quote unquote preventive services, which we can also talk about as a false narrative.
Absolutely. Yes.
But this idea that CAPTA, which mandates these reporting systems and the prosecution of families, comes with very little money to states, right? It was an inducement at the beginning for states to adopt these systems and policies, but the big money, is at the back end, right? So states can refuse to take the CAPTA funding, thereby releasing themselves from the so-called obligations, which are not really enforced anyway, right? And be free to innovate and to take measures, whether it's legislative or policy-wise or otherwise, to say, we're not going to keep doing that, right? We understand that this system is oppressive. It's not actually helping. It is expending resources on millions of investigations that really are go nowhere, that do not protect children, and it draws resources away from really being able to support families. So it's something that we're kind of looking into, and hopefully, we can start to bring that narrative forward and help states and other government entities really start thinking differently about how they support families.
That is quite intriguing, because what I hear is this push is to disrupt, stop structural institutional violence, not the other way. So you see, our paradigm has been individual, right, to the system, and now it's this movement is really saying we're getting closer to cutting the puppet strings, right? How we understand racialized trauma, structural violence, and trauma, and how that impacts communities, right? And history tells us that left to our own devices, before there were policies, structures, and we were just fine. Taking care of family. Back to your original, right? You have family, you take care of kids, a good family member, right? And the other question, just a curiosity here, what is your, so I'm hearing it doesn't matter if there's an appetite to understand structural violence, right? If it's just, that's the push, we gotta get there, disrupt that, right? Regardless of how you feel about it, right? We want to sort of expose that, and that's the push, right? We're going to cut policy, we're going to get reparations, and we want things to just stop. So what are your thoughts about like some of these incremental things that are happening? Do you believe in the fact that if we redefine neglect, we're going to have less reports? I mean, like, who fits the description of see something, say something, right? Like, I'm
fits the description,
right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I use that term. I'm laughing because I used that term recently about something related to this. I'm like, yeah, it was, as I'm remembering it, it was this idea that oftentimes when we're talking about, Black families specifically, and the trauma and violence inflicted on Black families, someone will inevitably pipe up and say, well, it affects white families too. And I'm like, yeah, right. Because, if you fit the description that they've already created based on our conditions that have been, defined as neglect, then yeah, you're, as my friend Joyce McMillan says, you're, collateral damage.
Collateral damage, right.
But here's the thing, right? I'm a realist. I'm a practical person. I understand that it's not going to stop tomorrow. There's so much invested. There's so many entrenched ways of doing things. The mindset which is the big thing, right? The culture, it's an industry that's not only supported by federal funding, state funding, local funding, but philanthropic funders who have built their whole identity, organizations that have built their whole identity around, child welfare and being, sort of making child welfare better. So yeah, so this is it's not gonna end overnight. And so when I think about, these non-reformist reforms or incremental changes or whatever, yes, there have to be changes that take place over time. And the changes that take place over time, when we think about them in the abolitionist dismantling frame of reference, we have to look and say, is this further entrenching the system? Is it harm reduction? Is it dismantling? Like, what is where does this fit along the spectrum of status quo, building, the infrastructure, continuing along the path that we're going? Or is it reducing the harm, the impact? Is it helping to, like, for example, quality of legal representation and parents getting legal representation before a court case is brought, parents being able to call on a lawyer, a free lawyer, when they're being investigated by CPS, right? So on the one hand, you can say, well, if you're putting more money into lawyers, you're building the system, right? You're legitimating the system because you're now saying, well, all we need to do is make sure that people have lawyers, and that's gonna, be fine. But right now, there's a vacuum where people's Fourth Amendment rights, First Amendment rights are being run over roughshod. And at the very least, these lawyers can come in and do harm reduction. They can kind of be a buffer between the government and families, to not only protect the rights of families, right, but also to enforce the obligations of the government, right, because they do have some obligations.
Absolutely.
Under reasonable efforts requirement, which is in and of itself, a bunch of bullshit. But at least there's something that they could, try to put some flesh onto those obligations, right? Or is it, something like, stop taking captive money, not just redefining neglect, but carving, just getting rid of neglect as a basis, right? Poverty related neglect, about food, clothing, shelter, as a basis for even reporting somebody, as a basis for prosecuting a family in court. Why are we prosecuting a family in court? Because they're homeless. Why are we, you know what I'm saying? So there's, I think, a range of different ways to look at these various changes that are being proposed along the way.
And I believe that, that's right on point. I do know, families are, or will be, relieved if we can get some pre-petition, legal representation effective. And so what I'm hearing you say is that we will always have to, right, analyze our ideas through the context of injustice in order to know, right, what justice liberation looks like. Because if we're not filtering through the lens of injustice, we'll never know if it's harm reduction, if it's a tweak, right, if it's radically getting to the root, all of these things. So I think that is good context for our listeners who might, just get a news feed that says repeal CAPTA or abolish CPS or fuck ACS, right? Like, this is all decontextualized stuff. And the more that we talk, right, it sounds like people might not even recognize that often, even if our worldviews are different, we might really want to get to the same damn place, right? I mean, right, really. But it's Angela Davis says it best, right? Our biggest challenge is one of we have an ideological challenge, right? And so the way we think we should go is often what holds us back. And I'm appreciative of you looking at philanthropy as well, because there's a huge position there where they have an opportunity not to cure the world's problems, right? But to redistribute funds. I won't even say wealth, redistribute funds, which redistributes power in a decentralized way. There's an opportunity there to redefine, right? Gather a new identity. It's okay to do that.
Yeah.
Right. It's okay to do that. We do it all day, right? We're always becoming something new. I appreciate that vantage point. Let me ask you about you and your attorney, for instance. We were talking about one of these hacks, right? So what as an attorney, what suggestions would you offer your colleagues to be better stewards of their power, right?
Yeah, well, from the attorney perspective, and thinking about the role that attorneys for parents, and putting aside for the moment the whole question of attorneys for children, which is contentious in some ways, right? Because looking at the perspective of parents who are the stewards of their families, right? And we're talking about family autonomy, family integrity, and the right of parents to have the care, custody, and control of their children. But now we're inserting another government person into the mix. But going back to the point of my colleagues, what I would say is, if you were a tax attorney, if you're a real estate attorney, if you're any kind of corporate attorney and your client comes to you, what is the relationship that you have to that client? The attorney-client relationship is one of principal and agent. The client is the principal, you are the agent. All of our professional rules of professional responsibility says that the client dictates the course of the representation. Unfortunately, in the family policing system, the child welfare system, that has been largely flipped, where attorneys will come in and say to the client, to the parent, look, this is how it's going to go down. I know this judge, the judge not going to go for this or that. You can want this or that, but that's not going to work. So this is what we're going to do, right? And they're not really listening to what the parent is saying that they need, what the parent is saying that what they want. And so what I would advise is to really stop and listen to what parents are saying that they want, what they need, how they want the course of the representation to go. If they say, look, I want to file, I want to get my kid back, right? Let's figure out how to do that, as opposed to saying, just do what CPS tells you and maybe you'll get your kid back. I hear this so often, that parents come and say, that's what my attorney told me, just do what CPS tells me and maybe I'll get my kid back, right? As opposed to using all of the legal mechanisms and tools at their disposal, just as if you were a tax lawyer, just as if you were a corporate lawyer, file motions, make arguments, do appeals, ask for sanctions against the government when they're not, fulfilling their obligations. I think there really needs to be a mind set shift with regard to attorneys who represent parents, that you're the agent of the parent, you're not the overseer or governor of how this representation should go. And really listening and believing parents when they tell you what's going on, and bringing that to the attention of whoever needs to, whether it's the judge or whether it's the agency, caseworkers or whatever, but really using your power to empower parents in their role as the authorities on their own lives and on the lives of their children and their families.
I really, and I'm sure that the parents listening will really appreciate that. And sometimes, right, I've heard some attorneys here in Florida, I asked them about what does effective, this was a couple of years ago, effective legal representation looks like through authenticity. And because of the admin nature of the work, I get it to a degree, but rigidity and being a robot really was a part of what they felt authenticity was. So having values and principles, and allowing parent to be the principal, and you are the agent and the conduit, right? There's a lot of fear of those who have power from the bench, right? Of saying the wrong thing. But I'm also aware that the Constitution, and I'm not a lawyer, so, but the Constitution is really clear on some things, right? And
Yeah.
like, I thought that was like law school 101,
Lost.
right?
Right, exactly.
Like
Exactly.
constitutional semester or something, right?
Right,
but
right.
but we
And
forget about
like,
family integrity and Fourth Amendment and 14th Amendment, right? We forget about those things, it
yeah.
seems.
And the rules of professional responsibility, just going back to the relationship between attorney and client, right? That you're not there to tell the client what to do. You're there to advise and counsel and represent.
Yeah, and I think that's just another thread of how
Yeah.
we get to police,
Yes.
quote unquote, those who fit the description, right? Some lawyers are deputies too,
Yes.
can be. And so thank you for that. Let me ask you a couple of questions before we wrap it up. Now,
Sure.
with all of that beautiful mind of yours and which you embody, like, what sources do you pull from, like, to remain steadfast, healthy, unwavering in this quest for liberation? What do you do for you?
Yeah, like I say, I am, a vessel of universal energy of my ancestors, fully grounded in my Blackness as a woman, American born, but African centered, and African centric. People, I'm black, blackity black, black, right?
Right.
And so, leading with that, and with the historical context, and just being open to universal energy of what is my best and highest contribution that I can make in any given moment for the liberation of Black families, right? I hope the day will come when I can spend my time and energy and thoughts on other things, like, just being out in nature, which is one way that I keep myself grounded. I make sure I get outside. I'm a tree person. Trees are my people. So I love being surrounded by nature, just staying connected with my family, my circle of professional friends who are aligned with my values and my principles, and really just, drink a lot of water, stay hydrated. But yeah, no, it's like, and one thing that I will say, Corey, is I've taken to saying, like I said, I'm 62 years old this year, and I've taken to saying I have more years behind me than I do ahead of me. And so time is precious, time is of the essence, and I have no time to waste in foolishness. The evidence is in. That's one of the things that we, talking about earlier. This moment there's been developments along the way where the evidence is clear that this is a racist system that has the most harsh impact on Black children and Black families. And therefore, I'm not arguing with people about that, right? What the reasons are and this and that. No, what I'm talking about right now is ending it, right? And doing something different and better that is actually supportive of children's welfare, and specifically repairing, the harms of the system to Black children, and setting them up for success, not failure.
That just hit my heart. I really appreciate that. And again, hearing the joy and feeling the vibes. And I'm a tree person, right? It's some people get it twisted, Angela. They think that it's tiring being Black. No, racism is what's tiring. Being Black is fucking amazing.
It's amazing,
Right?
man.
Right.
It's outstanding.
Right, right.
And unfortunately, we do have to spend a lot of energy on defending our right to be human, to just live our lives without these oppressive, policies and laws and practices and ideologies, right? But I really do find joy in banding together with others such as yourself and other people to fight the power, right? And to take back our power. And I like to tell parents, in fact, when they talk about, giving power to parents, no, parents have power.
Right.
They already have power. It's having the space and the courage and the support to exercise that power. And that's what I hope to continue to be, contribute.
Well, I feel it, and it's coming. And so
Yes.
let me ask you to leave something with our listeners. What are 3 questions?
3 questions.
Not one, right?
Don't make this real hard.
Real hard, right? What are 3 questions you want people, with the assumption that they are asking questions?
Mm-hmm.
What are 3 questions you want people to keep asking? And what is 1 question, because time is of the essence, right? 1
Mm-hmm.
question you hope in the near future you'll stop having to ask.
Whew, okay, well, I'm gonna start with the first one because that's easier. 1 question. The question that I hope I will stop having to ask is, why do you think Black people should be treated differently than other human beings?
Mm.
What are we doing here, right? So that's one thing, right? Because
Yes.
clearly we are treated differently. So why? And I don't want to have to keep asking that question, right? 3 questions that I hope people will continue to ask is, why are we doing this? What can we do better? And how can I best contribute to the uplift of humanity?
Right
Right?
on.
It all boils down to, what we're fighting is quote unquote man's inhumanity to man, right? Like that's so we want to switch that and really just be like, what in this moment can I do to uplift humanity? Yeah, I think that's the
Right.
most important. Yeah.
Right on, sis. And I wasn't gonna cut you off when you were saying, you drink water and you get close to nature. I'm just gonna out you a little bit, unless people already watch you on social media. You got a shoe game.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, I love, yes. Accessories, generally speaking.
Yes.
But shoes, yeah. And don't even play, you matching. You going toe to toe. I saw the studs.
I appreciate this time and energy that you have given us today. And what we'll do is never say goodbye, just until next time, right? So thank you so much, Angela Olivia Burton, for gracing us with your energy, your presence, and just your soul.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wow. What an amazing way to end 2022, anchored by Angela Olivia Burton. We're talking about ending it and repairing the damage. Parents have power. And there you have it, good people. Some nuggets to walk away with, some nuggets to ponder, a few things to resolve within your full being. As we approach 2023, let's think about the words that Angela has left us with. Allow those meanings to become sensibilities as we quest and move toward a liberated, humane, just system, society, and world. Thank you for listening. More to come in 23.